Welcome to Courtroom Conversations, right here on this classic Courtroom YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be diving into a case. It's making waves, It's a story of wealth, power, and accusations that honestly could just shake a real estate empire. We're talking about the Alexander brothers, Oren, Alon, and Tal. You might actually recognize them from the luxury real estate scene. But now they're facing federal charges, sex trafficking conspiracy, and these charges span over a decade, with dozens of alleged victims. Joining me to unpack this really complex case is an expert in navigating these legal intricacies, Susan Kelly-Ashford. Thanks for being here, Susan.
Glad to be here, Dylan.
I think, the gravity of this is really underscored by the U.S. Attorney's own words. He called the alleged conduct heinous, and that's not a term you hear thrown around lightly in these legal circles. So, Susan, before we kind of get into the specifics, can you give our listeners a breakdown of what sex trafficking conspiracy even means in a legal context?
Sure. A conspiracy charge means that prosecutors believe there was an agreement between two or more people to commit a crime. In this case, we're talking sex trafficking. And that involves exploiting people for commercial sex, which could be through force, fraud, or coercion. So basically, the prosecution is alleging that the brothers worked together to carry out a systematic pattern of abuse.
Okay, that's a lot to unpack, and I think we're definitely going to dig deeper into each of those elements. But what's interesting to me is that the prosecution isn't just focusing on recent events. They're bringing up allegations that go all the way back to the brothers' high school days. Like they're trying to paint this picture of a long-standing pattern of behavior. There are even witness statements that describe these alleged gang rapes. And the brothers allegedly use slang terms like, and this is disturbing, running train. Even Oren's high school yearbook quote is being brought into this conversation.
Yeah, it's definitely a bold strategy to use those events from their past to support the current charges. The defense will definitely argue that youthful behavior, even if it's inappropriate, is irrelevant to the current accusations. But the prosecution is likely hoping that this strategy will establish a pattern of disregard for consent and boundaries, which will make their case more compelling. I think it'll be interesting to see how the judge rules on the admissibility of this kind of evidence.
And to add another layer to this already complicated situation, Oren and Alon are also facing separate charges in Miami for an alleged assault back in 2021. What kind of implications does having charges in multiple jurisdictions have for the brothers, Susan?
It's a logistical nightmare, Dylan. They could potentially be facing separate trials in different states, each with its own set of laws and procedures. And of course, it just significantly raises the stakes. This isn't just about fighting one set of charges. It's about fighting multiple battles on different legal fronts.
The prosecution is taking this very seriously. They're actually pushing to deny the brothers bail, citing their wealth, international connections, and the potential for them to flee to Israel. I know that these bail decisions are about more than just someone's financial status. What are some other factors that come into play when a judge is considering flight risk?
You're right, it's not just about money. Judges also look at the severity of the charges, the defendant's ties to the community, their employment history, family connections, and even their prior criminal record if they have one. They're trying to assess the likelihood that the defendant will actually show up for their court dates, or if they pose a risk of disappearing. In this case, the prosecution seems to believe the Alexander brothers have the means and the motive to disappear if given the chance.
So the prosecution's case rests heavily on the accounts of the alleged victims, some of whom say they were drugged and have fragmented memories of what happened. That has to make building a case incredibly challenging. From a legal perspective, how do you even begin to tackle a case where the victims' memories are impaired?
Yeah, it's definitely one of the biggest hurdles in these cases. Prosecutors have to rely heavily on any forensic evidence that might be available. Things like DNA, toxicology reports, or really any other physical evidence that can help corroborate the victims' accounts.
I imagine witness testimony becomes even more crucial in these situations.
Absolutely. Witness testimony from anyone who might have observed the brothers' behavior, anyone who interacted with the alleged victims around the time of the alleged incidents, anyone who can provide context or corroborate any part of the victims' stories. It becomes incredibly important.
So even though those details are hazy for some of the alleged victims, those details can be filled in through other means to potentially support their claims.
Exactly. And prosecutors will also try to build a timeline of events. They'll use things like phone records, emails, travel records, credit card statements, anything that can help piece together what happened and when. They'll look for any inconsistencies in the brothers' alibis or any evidence that contradicts their version of events. It becomes a very intricate process of connecting the dots.
And of course, the defense is going to be fighting tooth and nail to challenge every piece of evidence and every witness statement.
Oh, absolutely. They'll be looking for any holes in the prosecution's case, any discrepancies in the accounts, any evidence that could cast doubt on the victim's credibility, or any indication that the encounters were consensual. It's going to be a very intense legal battle.
We'll dive deeper into potential defense strategies and other legal complexities after a quick break. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the Classic Courtroom YouTube channel for more in-depth analysis. We'll be back with more on the Alexander brothers case in just a moment.
You know, it's fascinating. This case really highlights how the court of public opinion can run parallel to the actual legal proceedings. You've got multiple civil lawsuits filed against the Alexander brothers, alleging rape and drugging. And even though these are separate from the criminal case, they add another layer of scrutiny, and they can really impact public perception.
Yes, like a two-pronged attack. You've got the criminal charges working their way through the system, and at the same time, you have these civil suits just shining a spotlight on the accusations, creating this kind of pressure cooker atmosphere. And the law firm representing several of the accusers, Wigdor LLP, they're not shying away from the spotlight. They've actually issued statements praising the survivors for coming forward and expressing hope for accountability.
It's a reminder that these legal battles often extend beyond the courtroom. Reputations are at stake, and the court of public opinion. It can be just as unforgiving, if not more so than a jury's verdict, even if the brothers are acquitted in the criminal case. These civil suits and the negative publicity surrounding them, it could have lasting repercussions on their lives and careers.
Especially in a field like luxury real estate, where trust and reputation are everything. This case is a stark reminder that even those who seem to have it all, wealth, status, success, they could face a dramatic fall from grace.
Yeah, and it brings up some uncomfortable questions about the role of wealth and privilege in the legal system. Will the brothers' resources give them an advantage in court? Will they be able to assemble a top-notch legal team that can poke holes in the prosecution's case? Will their connections and influence play any role in the outcome? These are questions that a lot of people are asking, and the answers could have a significant impact on public trust in the justice system.
Speaking of legal strategies, let's shift gears and talk about potential defense approaches. The brothers and their lawyers have maintained their innocence from the start. What are some of the key arguments or tactics we might see the defense use to challenge the prosecution's case?
Well, they'll likely try to discredit the prosecution's narrative at every turn. Challenging the credibility of the accusers is a common tactic in cases like this. They might suggest that the accusers have ulterior motives, that their stories are inconsistent, or that they're just misremembering events, especially given the alleged use of drugs.
So basically trying to create doubt in the minds of the jury about the reliability of the accuser's statements?
Exactly. And with the allegations stretching back years, the lack of physical evidence in some instances, that'll likely be a key focus for the defense. They'll argue that the passage of time makes it difficult to gather concrete proof, and that memories can fade, which makes the prosecution's case less convincing.
And they'll probably also try to challenge the prosecution's attempt to establish a pattern of behavior based on incidents from the brothers' high school years.
Absolutely. They'll argue that adolescent behavior, even if it was inappropriate, it doesn't necessarily translate into criminal intent as adults. They'll try to draw a clear distinction between youthful indiscretions and the serious charges they're facing now.
What about the issue of consent? It can be a complex legal concept, especially in cases involving alleged drug use. How do you think the defense might approach that aspect of the case?
This is where things get really tricky. The defense might try to argue that the encounters were consensual. Even if the women later regretted them or perceived them differently, they might try to paint a picture of willing participants who were engaging in a party lifestyle, perhaps even suggesting that the accusers are now recasting those experiences in a negative light.
But the prosecution's claim that the brothers used drugs to incapacitate their victims adds another layer of complexity to the issue of consent.
Oh, absolutely. If the prosecution can prove that the brothers administered drugs to the women without their knowledge or consent, that would completely undermine any claims of consensual encounters. But that requires strong evidence, and the defense will likely challenge any such claims vigorously.
So it sounds like the defense has a lot of ground to cover, and they'll be facing an uphill battle given the severity of the charges and the sheer number of accusers.
It's definitely a challenging case for the defense. And it's going to require a carefully crafted strategy to counter the prosecution's narrative and create reasonable doubt in the minds of the jury.
Well, Susan, this has been incredibly insightful. Before we wrap things up, I want to remind our viewers to hit that like button and subscribe to the Classic Courtroom YouTube channel for more captivating legal deep dives. We're back with the final part of our discussion on the Alexander brothers case. And I have to say, Susan, this is one of those situations where the legal strategies on both sides are fascinating to just dissect. It's like this high-stakes chess match. Each side's trying to anticipate the other's moves.
It is a great analogy, and one of the key pieces on the defense's chessboard is going to be how they address the prosecution's argument for denying bail. Remember, the prosecution is highlighting the brothers' wealth, international connections, and that possibility of them fleeing to Israel. The defense is going to have to counter those concerns convincingly.
So how might they do that? What are some arguments they could make to try and secure bail for their clients?
Well, they might emphasize the brothers' ties to the community, their businesses, their families. They've been living in the area for a while. They could argue that these factors demonstrate a commitment to the community, and that makes it pretty unlikely that they would risk throwing everything away by fleeing.
And they'll probably also try to downplay the prosecution's concerns about their international connections, right?
Definitely. They might argue that just having family or business ties in another country doesn't automatically make someone a flight risk. They'll likely present evidence of the brothers' history of international travel for business and personal reasons, showing a pattern of always returning to the U.S.
So they're basically trying to portray their clients as deeply rooted in the community, not the type to just disappear.
Exactly. And they'll probably also emphasize that presumption of innocence, arguing that the brothers deserve to be treated fairly and to be allowed to fight these charges while remaining free on bail. They might even offer to surrender their passports or agree to other conditions to try and mitigate that perceived flight risk.
This case really does have the potential to set some precedents, doesn't it?
Right.
I mean, the outcome could have ripple effects on how similar cases are handled down the road.
Absolutely. The way the court addresses issues like the admissibility of past behavior, the complexities of consent in cases involving alleged drug use, the weight given to civil lawsuits in a criminal case, all of these elements, they could have an impact on legal strategies and judicial decisions moving forward.
Yeah, and beyond the legal precedents. This case raises these broader societal questions about wealth and privilege. There's this perception that the wealthy and well-connected, they might receive preferential treatment in the legal system. This case is going to be closely watched to see if that perception is challenged or reinforced.
It's a valid point. The public is going to be watching to see if justice is applied equally, regardless of the defendant's social standing. The outcome of this case could have a pretty significant impact on public trust in the legal system, particularly in cases involving these high-profile individuals.
Susan, thank you so much for your insights on this complex and captivating case. It's been a pleasure having you on Courtroom Conversations.
My pleasure, Dylan. Always happy to delve into these intriguing legal battles.
And to all of our viewers, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Alexander brothers case. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the Classic Courtroom YouTube channel. For more in-depth legal analysis, this is Dylan Brooks Hamilton and Susan Kelly Ashford signing off from Courtroom Conversations.